Welcome to the Politics and Media programme. Former Home Secretary Jack Straw has again entered the debate about the abuse of teenage girls in the so-called Rochdale grooming scandal. In a Radio 4 interview, he claims that the Asian community must be more self-critical. The Daily Mail has joined in, arguing that members of the Muslim community would have known about the abuse. So is this simply the racist scapegoating of an entire community for the crimes of a few, or is there more to it? To discuss the debate with me in the studio are Assistant Comment Editor at The Guardian, Joseph Harker, and Elena Martellozzo, an expert in child sex abuse from Middlesex University. On the phone, we have Alyas Karmini, a Respect Councillor in Bradford. Welcome to the programme, everybody. So, Joseph, let me just ask you first, do you think that the points that Jack Straw raised, that the Daily Mail picked up on, are they justified, or is there something wrong with looking at this problem from this point of view?
I think they're absolutely not justified, and I think that we get clouded in this because the crimes that these groomers committed were so vile that and the offenders do severely need to be punished. But I think it's very easy for people to fall into a stereotype. They see some Asians or Pakistanis or Muslims, whatever you want to call it, involved in one particular crime. There was a Times investigation which centred on a maximum of 50 Pakistani people who were involved. And suddenly people are very quick to say, oh, well, there must be something wrong with the Pakistani community, and which is, you know, over 1 million strong in this country. And they fall into that kind of stereotype trap very, very easily. And I think we need to keep it in perspective. This is a tiny number of people actually involved. The crimes are vile, but we don't need to scapegoat a whole community because of what a few people have been doing.
Ellen, I mean, in your work, you must come across this problem reproduced across very, very different communities.
Absolutely. I've been working in child sexual abuse for about 10 years. And my focus has always been with groomers. And I always stress that it's impossible to make any kind of categories or stereotypes, because sex offenders come from any walk of life. However, as far as this case is concerned, sadly it involves some Asian communities, and the problem needs to be addressed. Not in a stereotypical manner, but if there is an issue within a community, well, let's talk about it. Let's be open about it.
This is where I disagree, because I think when it's a white crime, and we saw last week that, you know, a school teacher went away with a 15-year-old girl, and it emerged that there'd been lots of other cases, reported cases, with other members of staff at the same school. And we don't talk about, oh, that community must come together and root out the problem within. When we see other crimes taking place, you know, we've seen other, you know, in the past we've seen children's homes and child sex scandals at children's homes that weren't addressed, that were basically kept under the cosh because white men in power had power over people who weren't being listened to. And no one said, oh, it's a white problem, the white community must address itself. It's about these individual criminals and their own behaviour. And it just seems very easy, it's too easy for people to claim it's a community issue. I mean, why should members of the wider community in Rochdale or wherever actually know what this kind of small group of a dozen or fewer men was actually doing?
Absolutely, we need to, you know, to stress that it's not a racist issue. Definitely not, and that would be wrong to stereotype these kind of communities. We do know that the great majority of Muslims are law-abiding citizens. They respect women. They're, you know, great people like ourselves, I'd like to say. However, you know, and they should be happy, I think, and grateful as well that we are addressing this issue. And Alyas, who's on the phone, is doing some great work with the Muslim community, talking about sex, talking about respect, talking about issues that are very taboo still. This is not to say that sex offenders are Asians or white, or they come from, as I said before, from any walk of life. And this is what when I go to schools and speak to young people, I always say that every single community needs to be vigilant, because sex offending, sadly, takes place everywhere, and within the family, outside the family, within the Asian, white, black community.
Well, let's say every community should be vigilant, not just the Asian. Yeah.
Just a moment, let me bring Alyas in, because you've been listening to the discussion so far. You've worked extensively in this area. What, from your experience, are the most valuable things that you think need to be done, the most valuable approach?
The thing that emerges, you know, is that this is a national issue. This cuts across all groups. And I work with a lot of potential perpetrators, and you know, as the panel has rightly identified, they come from all backgrounds. It cuts across race, religion, ethnicity, class. And everywhere in the UK, as the Children's Commissioner rightly has identified in her ongoing inquiry, you know, this is something that's taking place across the country. Racializing an issue like this is extremely problematic because it creates these unnecessary stereotypes and it creates collective blame. It also fuels the far right. And what we do is we actually detract from core issues, which is about protecting vulnerable individuals. But I think there's another important thing. After you kind of qualify that, you have that caveat, it's important to recognize that sexual abuse takes place in all communities. However, communities are different in terms of how they respond and how they report sexual abuse intra-community. Unfortunately, I've got to still say that in a lot of Muslim communities, and we've got to recognize the Muslim community in itself is very diverse, covers many, many different ethnicities. Some ethnicities within that, there is a wall of silence when it comes to intra-community abuse. And I suppose this is not dissimilar to other communities. As a result of that, what we've had for decades is that abusers have basically got away with impunity. They've been serially abusing within the community, and because of issues around close, tightly knit family networks, issues around shame and embarrassment associated with sexual abuse, then people haven't reported this. And it's a key statistic, and we have to take an evidence and a research-based approach. We've got to look at the statistics, the hard facts. How much reporting of sexual abuse, intra-family, intra-community abuse is there from people, let's say from the South Asian community, and we'll find it's very low. Now, either that means that there is a very low level of sexual abuse taking place within the community, and that's what I'd like to believe, but the reality is, what it tells us, is that there is a wall of silence in terms of bringing those cases forward. That means that sexual abusers then operate with impunity, and what we found is that these subsequent grooming circles then, which emerge are like-minded individuals who have then gravitated towards group-based activity away from individual-based activity. So this is, you know, I think an important issue that we do need to address. I think Jack Straw, generally, I find it kind of like really baffles me how someone who comes from a majority Muslim constituency is so insensitive when it comes to talking about Muslim issues. But he's right in a way. Muslims do need to take introspect, look within the community, be self-critical. I do see, unfortunately, within the Muslim community, some real risk issues. Because people don't talk about sex, and because this is not an issue that you can address openly, then unfortunately it creates what I call lots of ungoverned spaces where people operate in very, very hidden places without support, without guidance, and that creates added vulnerabilities. So, for example, you know, because of issues around no sex before marriage in the Muslim community, many young Muslims who want to be married and who want to be in a relationship with, you know, someone they care about, unfortunately unable to do that.
Okay, Alyas, let me just bring some of the others back into the conversation a bit here. Joseph, I mean, isn't part of the problem with this is that however true a number of the points that Alyas makes are, they might equally, I mean, we could make a very good case about the Catholic priesthood and under-reporting, and surely members of the Catholic, you know, community more widely know this, and why don't they report it, and on and on and on. In fact, couldn't it be made about any group of criminals based in any community? Couldn't it be made about the great train robbers on the East End of London?
Absolutely. My worry with what Alyas is saying is that he talks as if there's something specific to the Asian Muslim community about this wall of silence, when, you know, this week there's a TV documentary about Jimmy Savile and allegations against him. And now suddenly it's emerging that there are lots of people who are aware of what he was doing who didn't say anything. We had the same a few years ago with Gary Glitter. People afterwards said, oh, I knew he was abusing children, but no one said anything. And this privacy, you know, basically paedophiles, they pick on vulnerable people, they keep it quiet, they're not going to be bragging about it to their friends or colleagues. People may have slight suspicions or not, but it's not the kind of thing that people necessarily want to raise, because they know how severe, how much damage it will do to the person they're accusing if they're wrong. And so people tend to stay quiet, and it's people of all walks of life. It's not a specific Asian thing or Muslim thing. It's not about religion. And when people try and say it's just a purely, as if saying that Asians or Muslims are somehow different to ordinary people and don't have the same values as the rest of us, then I have a real problem with that, and that's stigmatising. And it's very easy to do, because I see that from the start, when the Times kind of launched this so-called exclusive report a year and a half ago, and the media naturally fell onto this because they love stereotyping Muslims. The kind of negative stories about Muslims are actually profound at the moment. They're everywhere. And it almost feels as if the kind of Asian Muslim community feels a bit battered and feels a bit like, oh, well, we must do something about it. They feel so battered after years of being accused of being terrorists or terrorist sympathisers or whatever, that they've kind of leapt to be kind of almost apologising for themselves, rather than actually saying, this is a tiny number of people, we didn't know about it, and we didn't know about this going on. Why should we know about it? If it was happening in the white world, you wouldn't know about it. So why assume that we're staying silent deliberately, or that we're any different? And I think Alyas just kind of, in a way, he's just falling into line with the kind of onslaught against Muslims which is happening at the moment.
Do you think that maybe we should recast this as that all sorts of sections of society have a problem talking about sex abuse and about coming forward about it? I mean, it's quite a strong point that Joseph makes about Jimmy Savile and the BBC. I mean, there won't be headlines saying, is the BBC a closed community? Do they not know how to report this? Don't they know this was going on? It transpired some of them did know. I mean, those aren't stories that will be running for forever in the press over that issue.
Yes. There's a couple of points here that need to be made. The first one is, as you pointed out, we're talking about something that happens across all different communities, and that's a fair point, and I totally support it. However, every community is different. And like Alyas has a specific role within his community, we have a different role within our community, and we need to address what each community needs in terms of cultural issues, understanding, and in terms also of what victims report. I mean, we know, as Alyas said, victims are shameful, they're scared, they're fearful, they do not report. What we know is a tiny tip of the iceberg, very sadly. And again, this cuts across every single community. So we need to work closely with the community. We need to work closely with victims. We need to help them to understand what is abuse. Often they don't know it. Often they don't realise that they've been abused. Like the grooming process, we've learned through research and having worked with sex offenders, may take place in, within a week, a month, or years of becoming in a position of trust whereby the child doesn't know he's been exploited. And I think this is something that we really need to address. We need to start putting the child at the centre. And I'm glad we're having this discussion, because it really addresses and highlights some important issues within any community.
Because I think the danger is if we end up with this stereotype that, oh, child abuse, that's a Muslim thing, then white victims of child abuse in all the other different kinds of communities, be that English, Irish, whatever that happens to be, they will end up being not listened to. They will still end up being ignored, because people still won't face up to the fact that child abuse happens everywhere.
Yes.
Alyas, let me sort of extend the point that Joseph touched on there. Isn't the political environment in which this debate takes place something which almost prevents sensible discussion of it? I mean, for instance, the prevent strategy around terrorism is widely seen in the Muslim community as an encouragement to kind of, grass up people in the community. Are you surprised that perhaps people who are wary of the authorities and are wary of the media for all sorts of other political reasons won't necessarily rush to them when it comes to the question of reporting child sex abuse?
No, it is totally understandable. A community that feels it's been under siege for over a decade, repeatedly, you've got headline after headline. What tends to happen in that situation is that communities then retreat and become more insular and lose confidence, obviously not just with mainstream media. There's enormous lack of confidence in terms of mainstream media. Mainstream politicians, obviously, then, who pander to these stereotypes and pander towards scapegoating and collective blame, but also they lose confidence in terms of the safeguarding agencies, the police, and democratic process generally. And that is problematic, because what sometimes happens as a result of that, then you start to defend your own criminals. You see, because of a sense of victimhood, and then what you tend to do is that morally, sometimes you lose, I think, that clear moral compass, that where there is crime and criminality, you've got to do something about it. And coming on to earlier points, every community has a problem. I've never actually said that one community is greater than another. I work extensively with Muslim communities, and I live in that reality. I see it every day. I see it on a national level. I see it whether it's in West Yorkshire, or whether it's in South London, or whether it's in West Midlands. So I'm seeing a different reality that many other people see. And the reality I see is that there are some really difficult, challenging issues that I see intra-community. As someone who operates in that community, as a councillor, as an imam, as the various different hats I wear, I'm playing a personal responsibility in terms of getting my, you could say, house in order. And I expect other people to do the same thing. I expect the Football Association, for example, to really deal with major issues around sexual violence and the way that footballers seem to be disproportionately involved in issues around rape. But you won't find that a powerful institution like the Football Association and footballers who are role models for countless young men, I haven't heard them come out with a statement condemning sexual violence. I know the Rugby League has, but the Football Association hasn't. So we really need to put pressure on politicians. What they really need to be doing is saying that this is a societal issue, this is a national scandal, that we have vulnerable girls who are being abused by predatory males in gangs and as individuals. We all need to take responsibility for the issue. That's how it's got to be seen. And when we can see this kind of a real even-handed approach, then you'll find, you're right, the Muslim community will have more faith in engaging with the mainstream. Unfortunately, because we don't see that, we see this disproportionate focus on Muslims, we see this clear double standard in terms of how media represents these issues, and then there's a sense the criminal justice system, we know the reality of the facts of the criminal justice system is that it is institutionally racist and institutionally Islamophobic. So as a result of that, it doesn't engender confidence.
Joseph, I mean, you're pretty close to the sort of world of the media. I mean, we're a long way from having this debate in the mainstream media, aren't we? I mean, I can't remember the time when I turned on a mainstream television channel or opened up a mainstream paper and people made the points that all of you have made in the program today. So this is a hostile environment to try and get this message out, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, there may be the odd discussion program about this kind of thing, and are Muslims terrorist debate? Is you get these kind of very tabloidy type discussions that take place. But even aside from that, what's really the problem is the culture of the media organisations. They can have the odd debate, but if editors are so eager, easily slip into stereotypes, then that's where the problem lies. That they will just accept a story. Oh, Muslims do this, Asians do that, black people do the other, without giving it a second thought. And that's where the real problem lies, because that builds up the head of steam. I mean, from nowhere, 2 years ago, no one knew anything about, no one had any thoughts about Asian or Muslim people and paedophilia. Now suddenly this stereotype is set in, and it seems to be so deeply entrenched from nowhere, from no history or anything. And people, the other thing is that when it only becomes a racial issue when it involves minorities. When bankers bring the economy to its knees, no one says, well, let's look at Christian culture or English culture and find out what it is about that caused our banks to fail or caused all this fraud within our banks. It only becomes a racial issue when people see minorities and it fits into another comfortable stereotype to demonise people who are already being demonised. So,
Elena, how much do you think the media is responsible for closing down the frames of reference here so that it's almost an issue that can't be discussed in its proper parameters?
Well, I think the media has always made this kind of mistake, really, out of probably convenience. And but I think, like you've done here, you've invited speakers that are involved in the issue. We have an imam here, someone that has been working for many years with the media, and myself working as a researcher. We need to look at, what does research suggest? What's our work telling us, rather than just out of convenience focusing on a specific sector in society. And that could lead to a lot of problems. You know, as Joseph said, we would focus on one community and overlooking actually where the problem is. Research suggests that this is not the case. Research suggests that we need to be vigilant and work with communities and closely with victims as well, and to young people to prevent this problem, because it's happening. And it's not that it's just happening now, it's always been there. You know, if we look at you know, the Greeks and Roman times, sexual abuse sadly has always been present. But we've started to talk about it. We started to research and to study the problem and to address it. And I think, you know, having debates like this, it's very healthy for any community. And we should really continue with this work.
And what I find is a common theme is that in all of these cases, it's very vulnerable children who are victims. And it's children without parents or from broken families or whatever. And they become, they go to authorities to complain, and the authorities, you know, label them prostitutes or label them, you know, or liars or thieves or whatever, and they just refuse to listen to them. And in all these cases, it seems, when we go back to the kind of 1970s and 80s, what was happening in our children's homes across the country, it's the same thing, that children from kind of poor backgrounds are not believed when they go to authority. When they make that cry for help, it's ignored.
I think actually that attitude, it's slightly changed, it's slowly, I mean, it takes time. I work closely with the Metropolitan Police, where the child is at the centre of everything, at the centre of every investigation. And we're trying to really develop this collaboration between all different social services, health, education, and, you know, you name it. And that's very important. So the child is now at the centre of...
Maybe now, but it's been very slow to change.
Well, obviously, you know, just child sexual abuse wasn't even recognised within the research and the academic environment since the new feminist movement. Okay. So it's fairly new.
Let me just bring Alyas in for what I think will probably be the last word in this section. Alyas, if there was one thing that you think government should do about this now, what would that be?
Well, I think fortunately the government is embarking on quite a comprehensive inquiry. Sue Berelowitz, the Children's Commissioner, I think has a very different perspective from the mainstream media. I think it's been very balanced. I think we can see the balance there, which is about not creating stereotypes, recognising obviously the nature and extent of the issue. However, there's a major problem in terms of interventions. What we have are a lot of the agencies, the safeguarding agencies, principally social services, and the police obviously playing a major role, but we haven't got enough what I call grassroots projects, like the projects that obviously I run around the country. We just haven't got that, because one of the public cuts have decimated the voluntary sector and the third sector. They've also decimated good quality youth work and youth engagement activities, so we're not really even connecting at the street level. So as a result of that, you're right, it's just this very top-down statutory approach that we have, which is, I think, very detached from the grassroots issues. In addition to that, we have obviously the recent claims that, you know, as Ellen has mentioned, that young people, when they do report, are ignored and avoided. And they're not given any real credibility. And so I still think the balance is wrong. What we have, I find, is sometimes too light a touch when it comes to young people talking about their vulnerabilities and the experiences that they're having. On one hand, I've seen agencies take a very light touch, and it's again here, without my anecdotal experience, when a white girl is talking about being, you know, abused on the street, let's say, and, you know, regardless of who the perpetrator is, sometimes it tends to be a bit of a light touch. If that was a Pakistani girl who was talking about abuse, then there tends to be what I call a heavy-handed, over-the-top approach, where, you know, everyone flies in, that person's taken out. And I've had a number of cases where, you know, what we've asked for is family mediation to address some of the core issues, and we don't have that balanced, nuanced approach. And I think it's because we haven't got the partners. I'm going
to have to draw you to a close there, because I'm sorry we've run out of time. My thanks to Elena and Joseph in the studio, and to you for joining us from Bradford. Do join us for the second part of the Politics and Media programme after the break.